All this may, however, turn out eventually to have been a matter of temporary inhibition. Even late in life, some thaw, some release may take place, some bolt be shot back in the barrenest breast, and the man's hard heart may soften and break into religious feeling. Such cases, more than any others, suggest the idea that sudden conversion is by miracle. So long as they exist, we must not imagine ourselves to deal with irretrievably fixed classes. Now there are two forms of mental occurrence in human beings which lead to a striking difference in the conversion process, a difference to which Professor Starbuck has called attention. You know how it is when you try to recollect a forgotten name? Usually you help the recall by working for it, by mentally running over the places, persons, and things with which the word was connected. But sometimes this effort fails. You feel then as if the harder you tried, the less hope there would be, as though the name were jammed, and pressure in its direction only kept it all the more from rising. And then the opposite expedient often succeeds. Give up the effort entirely, think of something altogether different, and in half an hour the lost name comes sauntering into your mind, as Emerson says, as carelessly as if it had never been invited. Some hidden process was started in you by the effort, which went on after the effort ceased, and made the result come as if it came spontaneously. A certain music teacher, says Dr. Starbuck, says to her pupils, after the thing to be done has been clearly pointed out and unsuccessfully attempted, "Stop trying, and it will do itself." There is thus a conscious and voluntary way, and an involuntary and unconscious way, in which mental results may get accomplished, and we find both ways exemplified in the history of conversion, giving us two types, which Starbuck calls the volitional type and the type by self-surrender, respectively. In the volitional type, the regenerative change is usually gradual, and consists in the building up, piece by piece, of a new set of moral and spiritual habits. But there are always critical points here at which the movement forward seems much more rapid. This psychological fact is abundantly illustrated by Dr. Starbuck. Our education in any practical accomplishment proceeds apparently by jerks and starts, just as the growth of our physical bodies does. Quote, "An athlete sometimes awakens suddenly to an understanding of the fine points of the game and to a real enjoyment of it, just as the convert awakens to an appreciation of religion. If he keeps on engaging in the sport, there may come a day when all at once the game plays itself through him, when he loses himself in some great contest. In the same way, a musician may suddenly reach a point at which pleasure in the technique of the art entirely falls away, and in some moment of inspiration he becomes the instrument through which music flows. The writer has chanced to hear two different married persons, both of whose wedded lives had been beautiful from the beginning, relate that not until a year or more after marriage did they awake to the full blessedness of married life. So it is with the religious experience of these persons we are studying." Close quote. We shall ere long hear still more remarkable illustrations of subconsciously maturing processes eventuating in results of which we suddenly grow conscious. Sir William Hamilton and Professor Laycock of Edinburgh were among the first to call attention to this class of effects, but Dr. Carpenter first, unless I am mistaken, introduced the term unconscious celebration, which has since then been a popular phrase of explanation. The facts are now known to us far more extensively than he could know then, and the adjective unconscious, being for many of them almost certainly a misnomer, is better replaced by the vaguer term subconscious or subliminal. Of the volitional type of conversion, it would be easy to give examples, but they are as a rule less interesting than those of the self-surrender type, in which the subconscious effects are more abundant and often startling. Footnote. For instance, C. G. Finney italicizes the volitional element. Quote, "Just at this point, the whole question of gospel salvation opened to my mind in a manner most marvelous to me at the time. I think I then saw, as clearly as I ever have in my life, the reality and fullness of the atonement of Christ. Gospel salvation seemed to me to be an offer of something to be accepted, and all that was necessary on my part was to get my own consent to give up my sins and accept Christ. After this distinct revelation had stood for some little time before my mind, the question seemed to be put, 'Will you accept it now, today?' I replied, 'Yes, I will accept it today, or I will die in the attempt.'" Close quote. He then went into the woods where he describes his struggles. He could not pray. His heart was hardened in its pride. Quote, "I then reproached myself for having promised to give my heart to God before I left the woods. When I came to try, I found I could not. My inward soul hung back, and there was no going out of my heart to God. The thought was pressing me of the rashness of my promise that I would give my heart to God that day or die in the attempt. It seemed to me as if that was binding on my soul, and yet I was going to break my vow. A great sinking and discouragement came over me, and I felt almost too weak to stand upon my knees. Just at this moment, I again thought I heard someone approach me, and I opened my eyes to see whether it were so. But right there, the revelation of my pride of heart, as the great difficulty that stood in the way, was distinctly shown to me. An overwhelming sense of my wickedness in being ashamed to have a human being see me on my knees before God took such powerful possession of me that I cried at the top of my voice and exclaimed that I would not leave that place if all the men on earth and all the devils in hell surrounded me. 'What,' I said, 'such a degraded sinner as I am, on my knees confessing my sins to the great and holy God, and ashamed to have any human being and a sinner like myself find me on my knees endeavoring to make my peace with my offended God. The sin appeared awful, infinite. It broke me down before the Lord.'" Close quote. End footnote. I will therefore hurry to the latter, the more so because the difference between the two types is after all not radical. Even in the most voluntarily built-up sort of regeneration, there are passages of partial self-surrender interposed, and in the great majority of all cases, when the will has done its uttermost towards bringing one close to the complete unification aspired after, it seems that the very last step must be left to other forces and performed without the help of its activity. In other words, self-surrender becomes then indispensable. "The personal will," says Dr. Starbuck, quote, "must be given up. In many cases, relief persistently refuses to come until the person ceases to resist, or to make an effort in the direction he desires to go." Close quote. Quote, "I had said I would not give up, but when my will was broken, it was all over," writes one of Starbuck's correspondents. Another says, quote, "I simply said, 'Lord, I have done all I can. I leave the whole matter with thee.' And immediately there came to me a great peace." Close quote. Another, quote, "All at once it occurred to me that I might be saved too, if I would stop trying to do it all myself and follow Jesus. Somehow I lost my load." Close quote. Another, quote, "I finally ceased to resist and gave myself up, though it was a hard struggle. Gradually the feeling came over me that I had done my part, and God was willing to do his." Close quote. Quote, "Lord, thy will be done, damn or save," cries John Nelson, exhausted